Hello, today we're going to be making a whole bunch of flying geese. And we're going to be doing this the 4 at a time method. Sometimes it's called the no waste flying geese, but I prefer this method because we are not working with any bias edges before or as we're sewing. We'll have bias edges once we've done sewing and then cut, so they're less likely to be distorted. So to begin, we're going to have one larger square, which is going to be the middle of our geese here, and then 4 smaller squares that will become the outsides of our flying geese unit. So to begin, we are going to take a ruler, and I'm going to use a Frixion pin because I like the way that it has a really fine tip. And this is going to be a cut line in the end, so I don't care so much that it does disappear with ink, but again, I'm going to be cutting on it. So you could also use like a ballpoint pen or a pencil that has a really fine lead, but you just really want something that has a fine tip because you're going to get the best line exactly in your corner to corner if you're working with a real fine tip. So I'm just lining up my ruler along those corners and then making a mark, and I'm going to do that to all 4 pieces. Okay, and the last one. Okay, and so we have 4 of them drawn. And the first thing we're going to do to line them up is we're going to start with 2 small ones and our big one. And on our big one, I'm going to kind of turn it sideways like this. We want our lines to go right through that diagonal. So I'm going to line up my drawn lines, and these pieces will overlap right here, and you should kind of get one connected line then at that point. But when I line these up, I like to set mine in just a few stitches or a few threads of the fabric poking out, the larger square poking out from the smaller square. And what happens when I do that is it gives me a little bit more room at the tip side here when I go to trim it down, because these are a little oversized and we will trim them to the size we need, but it gives me a little bit more fabric up here where sometimes that can be short. You might not have enough fabric, and then that will distort our size of the unit. It won't be exactly the size we need. So I just tried to make sure I've got a little bit of that fabric from the larger square sticking out, and it's just a few threads worth on there. Okay, and so then my line now is a kind of a one solid line. And I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch away on both sides of the line. So I will come down this side and then flip it and go up this side. And actually it's probably going to be more of a scant 1/4 inch. That will also give us a little bit more room on our fabric so that we have a little bit more to trim off and we can square it up to the size we want a little bit better. So just by taking just a little bit smaller than a 1/4 inch seam, you might get a little bit more to work with and better results. So if you want to, you can pin this or just hold it in place, and let's go ahead and let's stitch that. Okay, we're at the sewing machine and let's go ahead and start stitching. So I'm going to ideally go a 1/4 inch away from my drawn line, but I'm going to do a little bit more scant. My stitching line is going to be a little closer to the stitch line or the drawn line, a little closer than a 1/4 inch, just to give me a little bit more fabric to trim and allows me to get a better exact shape when I'm done with it. So let's stitch. Okay, and I'm going to cut my threads, or you could just leave it and flip it around. And we're going to come back the other side here. Okay, and there we have our unit that is stitched. And we're going to go ahead and go trim that now. Okay, so now I am at my cutting area, and I'm going to take a ruler that is longer than the piece here along this diagonal. Just makes it a little bit easier so you're not having to shift the ruler. You can get it all in one even cut. And I'm going to place my ruler right on that seam, right on the drawn line. So it's going to be in the corners and on the drawn line. And then I'm going to slice right through that. And then I have two pieces that look like this. And this is your seam allowance, so it's not as critical that you're exactly a 1/4 inch or exactly on that line, because we did our stitching good. And then now, since we've cut that on the diagonal, we have a bias edge there. So we just want to be careful when we're working with that. So to press it, since those pieces overlapped, one per piece is going to be closer to the top layer, and so we want to press that first. So I'm going to just gently roll it back with my fingers and do a little finger press, and then go ahead and heat set that. And then the one that was on the bottom, I will now do the same thing. Roll it over with your fingers, kind of hold it in place, and go ahead and set that iron right on there. And that kind of sets that seam, and it gives us like a little heart shaped. So I'll do the same thing with this one. So the one that's on the top, I'm going to do first. Just kind of hold that back. And then the second one. And so now we have two pieces that look like that. And to continue, we're going to line up the other two squares that we have left. And the diagonal is going to go, the diagonal line that we draw is going to be right here in this. It kind of fits between these two pieces here, and it comes down to this corner. So, and again, I'm going to pull this so that it's really close to being in the corner, but I want to see a little bit of the fabric of my bigger square sticking out. And then I know that that is my drawn line, and I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch away on both sides of that. And we're going to do the same as this on this one as well. Line it up so it's not quite in the corner, and then we're going to stitch on that line. So let's go back to the sewing machine and stitch that. Okay, we're back at our machine, and I did not pin it, so I'm just going to check and make sure that it's still lined up where I want it to be. And then I'm going to stitch again like a little bit shorter than a 1/4 inch on both sides of this line. Okay, and then here I'm just gonna twirl it around and kind of pull out some of my thread there a little bit so I can maneuver it, and then come back down this side. So, okay, let's do the other piece. All right, get it lined up. And again, you can pin these. I'm not huge on pinning, so. Okay, so we've got both of those stitched. And let's go ahead and do some more trimming. Okay, I have both my pieces, and again, I'm going to take a ruler that is longer than the actual piece here, just so I get one straight cut, and I'm going to line it up corner to corner or on the line that I've drawn, and just go ahead and cut there. Okay, and so then we've got two there, and we'll do that again with this one. And get it lined up, slice our seam, and now we have actual 4 units, so let's go ahead and do some pressing with those. And we'll just do one at a time, and again I'm just going to kind of heat set it and then roll those stitches, or excuse me, that piece of fabric back, kind of do a little finger press and hold my iron on there a little bit. And then you can kind of see here there where, since we had more fabric up here and not in our corners down here. You can see I've got just a little bit of that extra peeking out, but it did give me a little bit more up there. So when I go to trim it, I'm gonna have a better trim because I'm gonna be able to cut on all 4 sides. So go ahead and we'll just heat set, roll that fabric back, and you can stack them up on each other. Okay, so we've got 4 units that are ready to be trimmed. So let's go ahead and do some trimming. Okay, now with this, they make lots of specialty rulers, and I do like rulers that are meant to trim down units that are created a little bit bigger. They give you a better exact piece when you're done that goes into your piecing, so it just kind of seems like your block has a better chance of coming out the right size and not being distorted if you can make pieces a little bit bigger, trim them down, and then sew them together. So I'm going to show a few specialty rulers for trimming this down, and I do like the Flying Geese by Block Lock. This has a groove in this ruler on both sides so that it fits snugly into your seams. Your seams have been pressed to this outer squares here, and so that just locks right into place, and I can kind of push it up there. That way I know then that my shape is exactly, I should have fabric underneath here exactly the size of this ruler, because that's what I want to trim. And then I'll take this and just go ahead and trim on all 4 sides of the ruler. And it does kind of stay in place because those grooves lock it in. I don't feel like I'm pressing down a lot, or I'm not too worried about my ruler slipping a little bit, but it comes out exactly then the size. I like that you can trim on all 4 sides. But the thing with the Block Lock is that you have to have a ruler in the exact size of the Flying Geese that you're making. So that's kind of the negative. You have to have several rulers if you make several Flying Geese different sizes. But for this quilt, we're just using this one size, so it is pretty handy to just trim up. Another ruler that I really like for Flying Geese is the Wing Clipper. And this one has multiple sizes, so you can get 10 different sizes of Flying Geese on one ruler. So that is a little bit, you know, makes a little bit more user friendly, or on our budget a little bit better. And it does have special markings on there so that you can line up your point here and then trim away, and you'll trim 2 sides and then flip it around and trim the other 2 sides. But the whole point of trimming down your Flying Geese is to make sure that from the tip of this point to the edge up here that it's a 1/4 inch. You don't want it to be smaller or bigger. It needs to be right at a 1/4 inch. So you can mark a regular ruler to do the exact same thing. Just mark off, even with a Sharpie marker or tape. You could line up the shape, find the center part where it has to be a 1/4 inch away, draw some lines, and then use those lines to match up on your seams here. So there's lots of different ways that you can trim those down. But again, you're not really taking off that much. It's just a few little, like probably less than 1/8 of an inch on each. So go ahead then and trim all of your Flying Geese to the size that we need that's written on our pattern. And we have lots to make, so just have fun with the process. I would say start with one and do the whole process to make sure that you are getting it to come out the size that you want. You can kind of figure out your placement when you line the squares up on your initial one. You can figure out your seam allowance. The bigger the seam allowance you have back here, the less you trim off up here. So kind of keep that in mind, figure out what works best, and then continue with the rest of the Flying Geese. So I hope you enjoy that, and happy sewing with all those Flying Geese units. Thank you. Now that we've made all of our wonderful little flying geese, it's time to sew them all together. So we will be making 4 rows of our geese, and there's 14 in each row. And so let's go ahead and I'll show you how to sew that together. And I'm just going to lay one of them over here so that I can use as a reference for the placemate. You don't have to have them all in the same order, but I'm going to try and keep them in the order. So it does help to lay them out on a design board. And what I've done here is I've arranged them in groups of 2. And I will start by sewing them together in groups of 2. And then I'm going to press them. Then I'll sew them together in groups of 4 and press until they're all in a row, and then I can press them flat. One thing that I did decide to do is press my seams open where I joined them, and that just kind of helps to keep my long row of flying geese, because there's so many going in a straight line. I don't like it to bow, and I found that if I pressed them open, it kind of flattened it more where it was more of a straight line. So that was just something that I found helpful. But let's go to the sewing machine and we're going to start sewing them together. Okay, at the sewing machine, I have my design board set up, and I'm just going to kind of place it off to the side up here and grab my first 2, and I'm going to align them right sides together. And when I do this, I want to make sure that the entire piece of the shapes are lined up. I don't want to see the one underneath of it peeking out anywhere. Make sure all my edges are lined up. And then I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam along this top edge. Now, it doesn't matter if you have the flat one on top or if this way where you can see the seams. Some people like to sew with the seam on top so they can kind of gauge where that's going to be. But I like having it on the bottom. I think I have less chance of the seam flipping on me if I have it on the bottom. That's just how I'm used to doing it. So that's just kind of how I do it, but it really doesn't matter, and you can do whatever way you prefer. Okay, so I got the first 2 done. Now I'm just going to grab the next 2, place them how they're supposed to be, and then line them up. The whole square should be lined up. Okay, and I'm just going to clip off this back one here so we can kind of take a look at it here. And there, so I can see that I still have my point, and I'm happy with that. And so I am going to just kind of finger press it here at the machine, and then that way I'll go to the ironing board and press them all at one time. So we'll just keep on sewing. Okay, and now that we have them sewn together in groups of 2, I'm just going to clip them apart, and we're going to go back to the ironing board and give them a good press. Okay, we're at the ironing board, and we're going to go ahead and start ironing. And so I kind of finger pressed that one. That was my check one at the machine, so I'm just going to kind of put some heat on there and let that set. And then here I'm going to put a hot iron on the seam to just set it first. And then I'm going to finger roll back so that I like to press with the solid big piece on top, and just roll that so I can feel that the seam is not, that there's not a fold in there, that it's completely flat. And then I'm going to place my iron on it and just let it sit there for a little bit. These quilter clappers are super handy, and you can set those on there as well. And then just keep going, set the seam. I'm going to roll it back, make sure it's all nice and flat. Then I just kind of have like an assembly line going here. Put the clapper on that one. So set the seam, roll it back with my fingers. That also helps keep it in a square shape. Sometimes if you just start pressing out here, you're going to have like a bow and your line's going to kind of curve to one direction or the other. So I find that if I finger press it and get it oriented right where I want it to, and then apply some heat, it does help. Now I do starch my fabrics pretty heavily before I cut, so that also is a huge help in keeping everything nice and flat as I'm sewing. So I just want to roll and feel that it's all where it's supposed to be. Add some heat. And I'm kind of pressing them all to one side first, and then I'm going to go back and press them open. And that is optional. It is something that I found did help, but it's not necessary. But if you do decide to press it open, you definitely want to make sure that you shorten your stitch length there so that you don't want any of your threads showing when that is pressed open. And the last one here. Okay, I'm going to set that one up there. And now these are some of that I started with, so they're ready to go. And then to press them open, I'm just going to do a finger press so I can feel again that they're nice and flat. And then place the iron right there on that. And let it set for a little bit. And then that's pretty flat. I can go ahead and put that on there and let that sit for a little bit. And if I wanted to put a little bit of water, I use a dry iron, but steam can be very helpful. And if I want to use any kind of moisture, then I will just go ahead. I have a spritz bottle, and I can just spritz a little bit of water onto the seam. Okay, get that nice and flat. Add one of those to it. And just keep going until they're all pressed. And now we're going to join our groups of 2. And again, same thing, just line up the whole shape and stitch the 1/4 inch seam. And grab the next one, line them up. Okay. Clip them apart and we'll go press. And then as long as I'm here, I know that this one goes on the bottom here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that one while we're here. And then I just have to press, and I'll just keep doing the same thing. Press the seam open, then come back and sew it together until I have my row completely done. Okay, and we're just going to keep going, sewing and pressing until we have our row completed. It's so pretty, and we're going to get 4 of those done, and then that completes this month's sewing. And I'll kind of show a close-up here if you can see where I pressed those seams open, just where I joined them. Again, that was just a personal preference, but if you are going to do that, make sure you shorten your stitch length. So have fun sewing all these flying geese. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.